Stay where you are, Emily. This service is for family, not charity cases. The words hit before the organ finished its breath. Pearls flashed at her throat. People turned. Chairs creaked. I stood in the back aisle of the old cathedral on the Charleston waterfront, rain spotting my sleeves, a small folded letter sweating in my palm. The place was polished and sweet with lilies, dark wood, brass lamps, stained glass holding back the gray afternoon like a dam. Ushers in black suits moved like waiters in a country club. Old money sat in tidy rows. I could smell salt and polish and a hint of wet wool. I kept my eyes on the casket. If I walked steady, I could place the letter and leave. One step. Another. The choir tested a soft note overhead. A gull cried against the glass. I rubbed the rain from my wrist and felt my pulse calm, just a notch. A man near the aisle dipped his head to a woman in a fascinator. She whispered, loud enough, "Isn't she the nurse's daughter?" Someone behind them breathed a small laugh. My fingers tightened around the paper until it bent. The pastor looked up from the bulletin and lost his place for half a second. He glanced at the front pew, then at me, like the room had a rule I should know. Claire turned in her seat. Black sheath, hair pulled smooth, a face built for photos. Her eyes slid down my dress, my shoes, the damp hem. She smirked like she'd been waiting all morning for this. Some people love scenes more than goodbyes. I stopped. My mouth felt dry. The letter cut into my thumb, a neat edge. I held it tighter because if I let go, I wasn't sure what would fall first, the paper or my breath. The organ rose, a patient tide. The pastor said, "We gather as family," and his voice thinned on the word. The front row didn't move. Margaret did. She raised her chin, turned halfway in the pew so the pearls led the sentence and not her face. "Don't turn his pity into inheritance theater today." The sound cracked the aisle in two. Heat burned my throat. A woman near the flowers coughed, a small explosion in the hush. Even the choir stopped at the wrong bar and shuffled their pages like the sheet music might protect them. I tried to breathe slow. My shoulders locked by themselves, my knuckles. No one answered. They didn't need to. People started adjusting flowers that didn't need adjusting. A man checked his watch and then checked it again. A woman fixed a bow on a wreath that wasn't crooked. Heads lowered over hymnals as if the words could shield them from a mess they'd helped make. Margaret lifted a finger toward an usher. She didn't point at me. She didn't have to. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Stay where you are. Don't come here. We're busy being proper." My grip loosened. Not my choice. My hand just let go. The letter fell. It landed face down and slid under the pew, one corner still sticking out like it was shy. I looked at it for a full second and then stopped looking, because if I kept looking, I'd pick it up and that would be worse. I turned. The soles of my shoes knocked a hollow rhythm down the nave. Each echo ran ahead of me, warning the door I was coming. My eyes stung. I kept them open anyway. The sound of the organ returned behind me, big and rich, like nothing had happened, like the last 5 minutes were just a pause in a hymn. At the doors, the air changed. The drizzle pushed in, cool and honest, cutting through the sweet flower smell. I stepped out and the wind took my cheap umbrella and snapped it inside out. The metal ribs flipped like a trick. Someone near the steps laughed once before catching themselves. My heel sank into the soggy strip of lawn along the path. The mud gripped and let go with a wet sound. I pressed my hand against my chest and counted 3 breaths, slow, in and out. I started walking. No one called my name. On the sidewalk, the rain made halos around each step. Cars rolled past the waterfront, lights on, wipers dragging across glass. I passed 2 guests from the church. They ducked their heads, not to greet me but to avoid the rain. One said, "Shame," and I wasn't sure who he meant. I walked 3 blocks before I stopped and fixed the umbrella the way I fix tape on a patient's line. Firm, neat, pretending it won't fail again. It held for a block more, then turned stubborn. I laughed once, short. It sounded strange in my throat. At home, the apartment gave me the kind of quiet that isn't empty. I set the broken umbrella by the door. It left a puddle shaped like a question mark. On the table sat a takeout box from last night and my hospital scrubs, clean and folded, smelling faintly of lemon and soap. The funeral program lay next to them, damp at the corners. The family list skipped a name. I didn't have to look twice to know which one. I took off my shoes and let them thud under the chair. I ran water in the sink and held my hands under it until they settled back into my wrists, like I was washing away hospital scent after a hard shift. The apartment sounded like the fridge and the rain and the soft buzz of the old ceiling light. Then the phone vibrated on the counter. The screen lit my knuckles. Alan Pierce, Esquire. The name hit harder than the rain had. I let it buzz once more and picked up. "Hello?" My voice sounded like I'd been careful all day and was tired of it. He didn't waste time. "Your father left sealed instructions, private, for you only." I didn't talk. The fridge hummed louder. The rain tapped the window like it was reminding me what day it was. "I'm sorry for your loss," he added, softer. "He asked me to call you today." I looked at the broken umbrella by the door. The metal ribs pointed up like bones. My hands were wet again, and I hadn't put them under the tap. I wiped them on my skirt and felt the fabric cling to my knees. "When can you come by?" he asked. I swallowed. "Tomorrow morning," I said. The words came out steady. "First thing." 8:30, he said. "Downtown." The call ended without goodbye. I set the phone face down and stood there, palms on the cool edge of the counter, shoulders soft for the first time since the aisle. I didn't cry, not then. The apartment held my breathing like it had room for it. I picked up the funeral program and looked at the empty space where my name would have been if belonging worked like seating charts. I folded the paper into a neat rectangle and slid it under the salt shaker, like I could pin the day in place before it warped into something I couldn't carry. I took the umbrella to the trash and then changed my mind and leaned it in the corner instead. I wasn't ready to throw away a thing that had tried. Dinner was whatever the takeout box still offered. Cold noodles, too much sauce. I ate standing, eyes on the clock on the stove, watching the numbers shift like they were walking me toward morning. The sound of the rain changed, softer, lighter, like the sky was tired too. I rinsed the container, stacked it with care, and wiped the counter with a cloth. The normalness of it held me steady. I set my keys next to my wallet. I looked at the scrubs with the hospital patch stitched on the sleeve and ran a finger over the thread, back and forth like reading in Braille. I plugged in my phone. It lit again with a calendar alert I'd forgotten to delete. Family service, 2 p.m. I pressed and held. The apartment clock ticked like a metronome in an empty room. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway a second, letting my eyes adjust to the softer dark of the living room. The rain had almost stopped. A car passed and washed the walls in a pale swipe of light, then left me alone again. I put the program in a drawer I use for instructions I don't know where else to file. I put my purse on the chair. I put myself on the edge of the bed, the kind of sitting that feels like standing, but lower. My hands met in my lap and stayed there without telling them to. When I lay down, my body did that heavy drop into the mattress like it finally trusted the floor not to move. I stared at the ceiling until it wasn't a ceiling anymore, but just a flat place to rest my eyes. The phone buzzed once more against the nightstand. A message from an unknown number lit the room and went away. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need another voice right now. I needed air and morning and a door with a brass plaque that didn't belong to anyone in my family. I turned to the window and watched the streetlights throw little squares onto the blinds. The rain clicked a last few notes against the glass and then gave up. Somewhere, a late gull cried like it had missed its ride. I let my eyes close. The room held. My chest rose and fell like it belonged to me. My hands finally unknotted on their own. Tomorrow, Pierce's office. We verify everything. I slept with my shoes by the door and the broken umbrella leaning upright like a thin, bent soldier. The apartment stayed quiet, and so did I, until the clock reached for morning and I reached for the keys. I sat at the end of the long glass room when Mr. Pierce said it, steady as a surgeon. The Hayes Foundation transfers to Emily Hayes. Everything in me went still. The fluorescent lights hummed like a bad memory. Margaret's pearls stopped mid-rise on her chest, then dropped. Claire laughed too high. That's a typo, right? Mr. Pierce shook his head. It's notarized and witnessed. No ambiguity. I pressed my hands together in my lap and felt my thumbs lock. The legal envelope lay open between us, thick with signatures. A fountain pen rolled, bumped my knuckle, and kept going until it hit the heavy oak. Margaret's chair screeched back. You took advantage of a dying man. Her braid. She's a nurse, Margaret snapped, pointing at my badge clipped to my bag. She made him sign between morphine doses. The words hung there and stared back at me. I felt the room shift under my chair like a boat in slow water. I said, careful and low, he signed months before that. Mr. Pierce slid a stamped page forward. Teams of witnesses, dates, a notary seal that caught the light and threw it back at our faces. Margaret didn't look down. She looked through me. We left the building into a wall of microphones. A reporter shouted my name like it belonged to him. Miss Hayes! Did you pressure your father for money? Another voice from my left. Are you taking over the foundation? Cameras cracked like July fireworks. Margaret reached the stairs with her attorney and turned her face toward the pity she knows how to sell. My husband was ill. He wasn't capable of rational decisions. Claire stepped up to the top step, chin set, the perfect daughter in perfect black. We'll fight for what's right. She's not family, she's an opportunist. Flashes washed the color from everything. I lifted my hand, not to hide, just to breathe inside the space it made. Mr. Pierce tried to cut a path. Someone bumped my shoulder. A microphone grazed my cheekbone. Emily! A voice barked. Are you ashamed? I kept walking. My heels clipped the concrete in a steady, stubborn beat. It counted me back to my car. That night, my apartment glowed like a small boat in a dark bay. Lamplight, one cup, one chair. My phone wouldn't stop. Every headline chased the next one down the screen. Nurse's daughter Hayes' legacy. Stepmother and daughter cry foul. Heiress scandal rocks Charleston Old Guard. Texts came in from co-workers. You okay? Avoid social media tonight. HR's asking questions. I flipped the phone face down on the counter. It vibrated against the wood anyway. Somewhere out the window, cicadas buzzed like a power line. My hospital badge stared back from my bag, my name in blue over white. I made coffee I didn't want and watched it turn cold. The TV in the corner had no patience for silence. It found Margaret on the evening news. It breaks my heart, she told the anchor, voice soft, lashes low. She used her position to isolate him. The anchor nodded like he'd been there. The crawl at the bottom slid past. Will dispute expected. Family refuses to concede. I clicked the TV off and listened to the apartment breathe. The fridge hummed. Pipes woke up and went quiet again. I washed the coffee I hadn't drunk down the sink and put the cup upside down on a towel. In the morning, the city felt like a hallway I'd been called down to clean. My phone rang at 8:02. HR. Emily, we're placing you on leave. Conflict of interest concerns. What conflict? A beat. Papers in the background. An email being typed without me. It's the optics, Ms. Hayes. My throat caught on the rim of that word. Optics? It's temporary. Just until things calm down. They don't teach you how to hold a phone when it shakes. I sat on the edge of the couch and pressed it to my shoulder so I could breathe. The TV was back on by itself, or I'd turned it on without knowing. Claire stood beside a lawyer on a courthouse staircase. Margaret dabbed a dry eye. We just want fairness, Claire said. We're not angry. The line broke me into a small, sharp laugh that hurt my ribs. I set the phone down and stared at the blank spot on the wall where I'd always meant to hang a picture. By noon, the town had decided what I was. #GoldDigger trended on my name. Comments piled like trash at the curb. Hospice nurse turned heiress. Can't buy class. Daddy issues with a paycheck. I scrolled once, learned nothing, and closed it. I walked to the corner store because I needed eggs and because I needed to stand up. The bell over the door sang out like it did for everyone. 2 people looked, then looked down. The cashier whispered, "Bless her heart," to the boy bagging. If you know Charleston, you know what that means. "Paper or plastic?" the boy asked me, eyes somewhere around my shoulder. "Neither." I slid cash across and took my change and walked home with a carton of eggs under my arm like it might jump. When I reached my building, a car I didn't know idled at the curb. A woman in sunglasses raised her phone, took a picture, and put the phone down quick like it had burned her hand. I unlocked my door and went inside and made eggs I couldn't taste. 2 weeks. That's how long it took them to file. The envelope was thick again, but this one didn't carry anything that felt like mercy. Mr. Pierce called before I could pull the papers all the way free. They filed the lawsuit. Undue influence. I set the envelope down and stepped out onto the balcony. Rain tapped the metal rail in an even, patient rhythm. "What now?" I asked. "Now we let the court see what he saw in you." It came out of me like a tired joke. I hope that's enough. "It will be," he said, but his voice wavered at the edges in a way he probably hoped I couldn't hear. After we hung up, I packed a small bag with things I could count. A legal pad, a pen that didn't leak, the small silver necklace from my father in a pocket of old velvet. I placed my badge on the table and left it there. The next days were appointments and photocopies. The city moved around me like a machine I couldn't turn off. I learned to keep my eyes level in lobbies. I learned which doors had the heaviest handles. On a Tuesday, Mr. Pierce slid a file across the hood of his car because the parking lot was closer than the elevator and faster than the stairs. "We have a hearing date," he said, "and a judge." "Who?" I asked. He checked himself, then shook his head. "You'll see it on the docket." I nodded. I didn't ask again. There's a kind of respect in not touching something too soon. We walked inside. The courthouse lobby smelled like wax and old paper and the kind of heat that sinks into stone. People everywhere, shoes shuffling, voices low and sharp, faces that had nothing to do with mine but felt like I knew them anyway. Mr. Pierce touched my elbow. "Stay close." I did. We moved past a wall of framed portraits, all the old smiles of men who had never imagined my face being here for this reason. We reached the clerk's window. The clerk slid a sign-in tablet under the glass and didn't look up. Mr. Pierce wrote our names and the case number. She stamped something without stopping her gum. "Next," she said to no one and everyone. We stepped back into the lobby and the building turned louder. 2 lawyers laughed at something I couldn't hear. A janitor guided a mop through a slow, wet square and didn't break his rhythm when the elevator dinged. A woman in a red dress answered a phone, and it was suddenly obscenely funny to someone on the other end. I felt my chest tighten and counted to 10 with the elevator lights. On 5, the door opened. We didn't get in. Mr. Pierce looked at me, then away, then back. "Listen," he said, "they're going to make this ugly." "They already have." "Worse," he said. "They'll say you wanted the money. They'll say you were alone with him. They'll use your job against you." I rolled my shoulders like a runner before a cold start. I was alone with him. He looked pained. "Yes, but for the right reasons." We stood in the flow of people and let them go around us like water around a rock. I thought of my father's hand on my wrist in the dark hallway after a bad night, when all I'd done was count his breaths and count mine. A photographer lifted a camera near the door. I turned my face and saw myself on his lens for a second, flat and strange, and then the lobby swallowed that too. By the time I reached home, the sun had shown up just to leave. My phone blinked with numbers and no names. I didn't answer. I set the new papers on the kitchen table beside my badge and my empty cup. I put my keys on top like a paperweight. Mr. Pierce texted a few minutes later. "Hearing set. Docket list posted at 7 a.m. I typed back, "I'll be there." He responded, "Get some sleep." I tried. The city kept breathing. Someone argued 3 floors down about a pizza. A siren drifted in and drifted out again. I lay on my side and watched the dark window turn dull. At 6:50, I was already in the lobby of my building with my bag over my shoulder. At 6:58, I was outside the courthouse under a sky the color of dishwater. At 6:59, a woman with a badge like mine but a different name held the door open with her hip while she retied her hair. At 7 on the dot, the docket monitors blinked awake. A column of black text scrolled into morning. I found my case number and followed the line left to the judge's name. My mouth went dry. I felt the old necklace at my throat with 2 fingers and dropped my hand. I didn't say her name out loud. I didn't say anything. I stood there until Mr. Pierce arrived at my side and nodded once to the screen. "You ready?" he asked. I gave him the only answer I had. "I'll be there." He let out a breath and for the first time all week smiled without looking like it hurt. The monitors glowed, the lobby buzzed, the building settled on its foundations and waited for us to climb. I closed my eyes for 1 second and opened them. The case number didn't move. The letters didn't rearrange themselves into something easier. My hands steadied on my bag strap just enough to feel my pulse. The city had called me liar. The job had pushed me out. The family had dressed their cruelty up as grief and dared me to argue with it. I looked at the screen again and felt the ground find me. "Then she'll know I'm not lying," I said, and tasted the truth in my own mouth. I hear the first cameras before I see them, clicks rolling like hail on glass. Claire's white SUV glides up to the courthouse steps as if it's a red carpet, not plain concrete. She steps out in a fitted suit the color of winter light, hair smooth, heels sure. The smile she gives the photographers sits perfectly on her face, like it's been practiced in mirrors. Margaret follows, all pearls and posture. She offers a tissue to no one, eyes lifted just enough to show a sheen. A reporter calls, "Mrs. Hayes, any comment on your stepdaughter's claims?" "We just want to honor Robert's memory," she says, voice soft, almost trembling. A dozen shutters answer her. The image is set. My cab stops behind a delivery truck. I pay cash, step out, and close the door gently, because anything louder might sound like a plea. I hold one thin folder to my chest. No one moves toward me. One reporter glances over and says to another, "That's the nurse." He doesn't mean it like a title, he means it like a category. Inside, air conditioning bites. The marble floors shine. The banners celebrating courthouse donors hang in neat rows, gold letters spelling names that matter here. Mine is not on any wall. Mr. Pierce meets me in the hallway and leans close. "Remember," he says, "don't rise to it." "I won't," I say. My voice sounds even. It surprises me. We take our seats. Claire sits across the aisle, head high, one ankle crossed over the other. Their attorney leans in, says something, and she laughs once, soft and controlled, like a good student turning in a perfect exam. Margaret presses a lace handkerchief to her cheek without smudging her lipstick. The gavel strikes once. It's clean. "Let's begin," Judge Brooks says, and the room shifts to stillness. The bailiff reads from the file. "As to the disposition of the Hayes Foundation, to my daughter, Emily Hayes." The phrase lands plainly, as if it's just paper, not a fuse. A smirk flickers at Claire's mouth before she smooths it away. Margaret leans in and whispers. The jurors notice. So do the cameras. I settle my hands flat on the table and keep my eyes forward. I can feel my heartbeat in my wrists. The family's lawyer stands. His tie is navy, his smile even. We'll begin by showing the court who Robert Hayes trusted most, his daughter Claire, the example of his legacy. Screens light up. Photos fill the courtroom. Claire in cap and gown. Claire at a gala with a glittering step and repeat behind her. Claire holding a giant cardboard check. Whispers slide across the gallery. She looks just like him. She always did charity work. The lawyer walks the jury through the images like a docent in a museum. Margaret dabs at her eye and murmurs, "He adored her." Then his arm lifts toward me. This, however, is a different story. Estranged for years, no contact. She reappeared when money was involved. Dozens of eyes cut to me like a door swinging open to wind. I exhale through my nose and feel a small tremor in my jaw. I press my tongue to the roof of my mouth until it stops. Across the bench, Judge Brooks glances up from her notes. A flicker, not much, but the kind that says she is taking measure. The lawyer presses on. While Claire pursued excellence, Ms. Hayes chose distance. He says it without heat, which makes it worse. The photos keep moving. Claire shaking hands, Claire speaking at a fundraiser, Claire with Margaret and my father on the porch steps, smiling like a proper family. My folder stays closed. "Counsel," Judge Brooks says, "this is a probate case." Get to relevance. "Relevance speaks," he says, "to intent." He waits her for a nod. She gives him half of one. He turns back to the jury. Claire was Robert's pride. His public life reflected his private choices. I say nothing, but the words scrape against me like sand. The attorney sits. The room exhales in quiet. Margaret blinks. Her lips part in a soundless answer. "No," she finally says. "Then let's deal with facts," the judge says, and looks down to her file again. The air changes by 1 degree. It's not victory, it's oxygen. We break mid-morning. The hallway erupts with microphones and breathless questions. Tight circles form around Margaret and Claire in seconds. I'm left with the wall, the water fountain, the cold hum of the building. Claire's friend leans close to her. I don't mean to hear it, the mics do. "She's playing the orphan act again," Claire whispers, all sugar gone from her tone. A camera catches the line. She glances up and spots the red light, but it's too late. The crack is on tape. By afternoon, the headlines scroll across phones. Hayes' heir mocks stepsister during trial. Margaret snaps at a reporter. "That's out of context." The reporter nods like he cares. He doesn't. We file back in for the next session. The room feels tighter, not because there are more people, but because more people are awake. Mr. Pierce squeezes my elbow and sits. The opposing attorney adjusts his cufflinks twice. "Let's proceed," Judge Brooks says. Her voice stays calm, the kind that makes people listen without feeling ordered to. The questioning circles the same ground until it wears a shallow path. Dates, visits, calls. Margaret's answers are velvet-wrapped. Claire's are softer, the kind that wants to sound reasonable. She holds the jury with the right amount of eye contact, the careful tilt of a head, the quiet nod when asked if she loved her father. She knows which words to leave out because leaving them out says more. Mid-afternoon, the air grows heavy with repetition. The judge moves us forward. The lawyer returns to the theme he loves. "Miss Hayes reappeared when money was involved." I lean toward the mic. "I reappeared when hospice was involved," I say. "He asked me to." A woman in the back row covers her mouth with her hand. Someone near the aisle whispers, "God." It's too loud for a whisper. Margaret leans over, not looking at the judge, not caring if anyone sees. Her voice lands just above a breath. "You'll never be one of us." It hits in the place where breath lives. For a second, the room swims. I straighten my back, place both feet flat under the table, and stare at the wood grain until it stops moving. "Enough whispering," Judge Brooks says without raising her voice. Margaret leans back, lips pressed together in a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. Claire crosses and uncrosses her legs. Her heel taps once against marble and stops. We break again, just long enough for the hallway to fill with coffee lids and headlines. A producer asks a cameraman, "Did you get the orphan line clean?" He nods. People laugh too loudly at something that isn't funny. I stay in my seat when we reconvene. My palms are dry now. I place the folder on the table and tap its edge once to square the paper inside. Mr. Pierce notices, glances at me, and gives the smallest smile, like a signal that he saw me hold, not break. When the judge asks if there's anything further for the day, their attorney rises to grandstand. He replays the same summary with new words: love, legacy, pride, disappointment, arranged like furniture in a room no one sits in. No one interrupts. When he sits, the quiet feels like a weight put down. Mr. Pierce stands. He clears his throat. "Your Honor," he says, Before tomorrow's recess, the defense will present a witness. The room tilts. The gallery shifts as if someone pulled a string. Margaret stiffens. Claire blinks twice. "Who?" the opposing counsel says, too fast. Mr. Pierce only smiles a little, a bare lift of his mouth. Someone who knows what happened in that house. "Name," the attorney presses. "Tomorrow," Mr. Pierce says. Murmurs rise like heat. A man in the back laughs once, a sharp, excited sound. Reporters hold their phones higher. Judge Brooks taps her pen against the bench once, and the noise settles. "We'll proceed at 9, she says. Her tone edges toward tired, not of the case, but of the theater. Court is adjourned. The gavel hits, people stand, chairs scrape. The white noise of conversation fills every corner. Margaret leans toward Claire. Who did they find? Her pearls tremble at her throat. Claire stares at the table as if an answer might be hiding in the wood. Mr. Pierce bends to me. You'll remember her face, he says quietly. Hope is a strange shape. It doesn't feel like joy. It feels like a door unlocking in a dark room. I nod once. My throat tightens. I swallow, hard enough to steady it. When I stand, my knees feel steady under me. I gather the folder, the pen, nothing else. The hallway floods again. The cameras are there like always, waiting for a stumble, a flinch, a sentence they can sell. Claire faces them with a rehung smile. Margaret finds the best light without trying. Their attorney speaks in practiced cadences that rise and fall just so. I step into the outer ring and keep moving. No one asks me a question. A reporter's boom mic grazes my shoulder as he leans past. Claire, can you respond to the hot mic? She smiles at him, patient, like a teacher with a favorite student. Outside, the sunlight sits low and flat on the steps. The heat of the stone comes up through my shoes. People push past, chasing quotes. A woman from the gallery touches my arm as she passes and whispers, "Be strong." I nod. I don't know her name. Mr. Pierce catches up to me at the curb. Eat, he says. Sleep. Say nothing online. Wasn't planning on the last one, I say. He smiles. Good. See you in the morning. He heads for his car, phone already at his ear. The cab line snakes along the block. I choose to walk. The air off the water smells like salt and sunburn, and for a few minutes, no one says my name. At a crosswalk, a boy in a school polo looks up from his scooter and stares at me with the blunt curiosity of a child. Are you famous? He asks. I shake my head. Just in the courthouse, I say. He rolls away, unimpressed. Back in my apartment, I set the folder on the table and pour a glass of water. The TV is off, the phone face down. I sit. For the first time that day, I let my shoulders drop, just a little. The room is quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and the buzz of the street beyond the window. The stillness has weight. Tomorrow, a voice from the past will walk into that room and speak. Tonight, I sit with the silence that comes before it. I don't rehearse answers. I don't write statements. I let the day keep its own noise without me. When I stand to turn off the light, I catch my reflection in the window. A woman in a plain navy dress, hair pulled back, eyes clear. I don't look like a headline. I look like someone who's still standing. I switch off the lamp. The room goes soft. I breathe in, slow and deep, and the breath doesn't catch. That is enough for now. The bailiff calls the room to order, and every sound thins out until I can hear the click of Margaret's bracelet against the table. Judge Brooks looks over the rim of her glasses. The defense may call its next witness. Mr. Pierce rises. The defense calls Mrs. Eleanor Leary. A low stir moves through the benches, soft, quick breaths, a cough that bounces off the marble. The back doors open. Mrs. Leary steps in on careful feet, one hand wrapped around a wooden cane. The tip of it touches down, lifts, touches down. Steady, stubborn. Claire looks away like she's checking the time. Margaret's jaw sets so hard I can see the muscle jump. I sit straighter without meaning to. I don't blink. At the rail, the clerk lifts a little Bible. Mrs. Leary lays her palm on it. Her hand shakes, but her voice doesn't. I swear to tell the truth. Please be seated, Judge Brooks says, softer than usual. Mr. Pierce takes 2 steps forward. He doesn't smile. Mrs. Leary, how long were you employed by the Hayes family? 31 years, sir. And in that time, did you come to know the family well? She nods once. Too well. A ripple of laughter from the back. It dies when the judge turns her head. You were present during Mr. Hayes's final illness, Pierce asks. Yes, Mrs. Leary says, until I wasn't wanted there anymore. Who made that decision? Mrs. Hayes did. She tilts her chin toward Margaret. That's not accurate, Margaret answers on cue, polite as a brochure. Mrs. Leary leans closer to the mic. You told me, we don't need witnesses for family matters. The sentence hangs in the air like it has its own weight. The room leans toward it. I feel the bench under me, solid, not moving. Mrs. Leary, Pierce continues, did you see Emily during that time? Yes, every day. What was she doing? Taking care of him. Feeding him, reading to him, sitting in that chair by the window until morning. Did she ask for payment? Never. A small shake of her head. She barely ate herself. Margaret's pen slams the wood. She wanted his money. Mrs. Hayes, Judge Brooks says, not loud. Sit down. The hum returns, phones pocketed, throats cleared, a camera shutter at the back. Mrs. Leary lifts her chin. You wanted his name on checks, not his hand to hold. Gasps like a sudden inhale around the room. The camera clicks again and again. Claire looks at her lap. She doesn't look up. Gasps like a sudden inhale around the room. The camera clicks again and again. Claire looks at her lap. She doesn't look up. Mrs. Leary, Pierce asks, steady, did you observe any tension between Mr. Hayes and his wife during his illness? She nods. He used to say, I'm tired of being managed like an investment. He was confused, Margaret snaps. Sick. Sick, yes, Mrs. Leary answers, not turning, but never confused about love. Order, the judge says, and taps the gavel once. A single tap that feels like a hand on a shoulder. Enough. Mr. Pierce takes a folder from his table and holds it up. Mrs. Leary, can you identify these documents? She squints at the copies, then points with one careful finger. Those are checks. I filed them for her. Another nod toward Margaret. Caregiver fees, $12,000. The room answers all at once, a low O, a fresh burst of scribbling. I keep my eyes forward. My throat feels tight and cool at the same time. My palms open on the table so I don't clench them. During those same months, Pierce says, Mrs. Hayes, were you residing in Palm Beach, Florida? Margaret doesn't speak. Her attorney leans in, whispering fast. Judge Brooks looks down the bridge of her glasses. Answer the question. Yes, Margaret mutters. Claire's face loses color. She shifts her chair an inch, not enough for anyone to call it out, enough for me to see it. Mrs. Leary turns her whole body toward Margaret. The cane tip slides, taps, plants. He asked for you, she says. The sound is smaller now, and it hurts more. Every night he asked where you were. That's not true, Margaret says. The glass in her hand wobbles. She puts it down, picks it up again. And every night, Mrs. Leary goes on, Emily told him you'd call tomorrow. She doesn't blink. You never did. You don't know what I was dealing with, Margaret says. She keeps her eyes on the water. I know what he was dealing with, the old woman answers. Silence. The judge doesn't cut in. No one moves their chair. No one coughs. Mrs. Leary breathes like she climbed stairs and didn't stop. Her mouth tightens. He wasn't perfect, she says, but he loved that girl. The cane shakes in her hand, but her voice doesn't. You just couldn't stand to see it. My eyes burn. I blink hard. I won't let the tears fall here, not now. Claire sits like she's been pinned to her seat. Her lord trembles. Mascara gathers in the corner of her eye and doesn't go anywhere. Margaret lifts the glass to her lips and misses her mouth the first time. She fixes it and drinks. The ice clicks against her teeth. Mrs. Leary turns her head and finds me where I sit. You were there when no one else was, she says softer. Don't ever doubt that. I nod once. It feels like the only thing I can do without falling apart. "No further questions," Pierce says, his voice almost kind. The judge looks to the other table. "Cross-examination?" The opposing attorney flips a file, flips it again, shakes his head. "No, Your Honor." "Very well, Judge, very well." Judge Brooks sits back. "We will recess for 30 minutes. Her gavel falls. Not loud, final. Mrs. Leary rises with the help of the rail. She takes her time. People stand without being told, then pretend they didn't. The sound of shoes on stone trails her to the door. Margaret stares at a point on the table. Claire's eyes follow the old woman all the way out, like maybe there's a phrase she wants to pull back into her mouth. I grip the edge of the table. The wood presses into my fingers. I pull air in and it feels thick, but it goes down. The room empties, fills the hallway, breaks into whispered circles. Mr. Pierce leans close. "You all right?" "I'm here," I say. It's the truest answer I have. He nods. "We'll use the break to get the exhibits logged." I stand, legs awake with pins and needles, and walk to the water cooler. The cup crinkles in my hand. I drink and taste paper and dust. A woman in the gallery, a stranger in a navy dress, touches my elbow as she passes. "You did right," she says. She keeps walking. In the hallway, the donors hover like they smell smoke. Church ladies fold their programs and unfold them. A man in a seersucker jacket says, "Shame," softly, but I can't tell which way he means it. The press is quieter than usual. They're busy uploading the one line everybody heard. "You wanted his name on checks." The recess ends on the judge's clock, not the crowd's. We file back in. I sit. Margaret's lipstick is perfect again. Claire has new powder. Mr. Pierce organizes his stack into a straight line. The cane marks on the linoleum near the witness stand are small and dark, like notes on staff paper no one will play. "Be seated," Judge Brooks says. Her voice has its usual weight again. "Before we continue, I'm ordering a handwriting and medical review of the will." The air ripples. Margaret's lawyer shoots up like a spring. "Your Honor, is that necessary?" "Necessary," the judge says, "and overdue." She looks at me. Not warm, not cold. Firm. Truth deserves proof. The tip of my tongue presses to the back of my teeth so I won't say thank you out loud. It still slips out on a breath. "Thank you." Margaret clutches her purse with both hands like it might leave the table if she lets go. Claire doesn't move at all. The gallery starts to murmur until the bailiff says, "Quiet, please," and everyone remembers where they are. "Counsel," the judge adds, "coordinate with the clerk. We'll reconvene when the analysis is complete." The gavel drops again. This time it sounds like a door that opens and doesn't slam. We stand because that's the rule. I'm the last to leave our table. My fingers brush the photo in the stack, me and my father on the porch, laughing at something we didn't write down. I slide it under the top folder and close the binder. In the corridor, the noise breaks into pieces. A reporter dictating into her phone. A donor saying, "Devastating." The cleaner's cart squeaking toward the restrooms. Pierce touches my shoulder, light, quick. "They'll try spin in the press," he says. "Don't engage." "I won't," I say, "and don't look toward the cameras." Down the hall, the elevator doors open, and I catch a last glimpse of Mrs. Leary with a younger court aide at her side. She lifts her cane in a tiny wave without turning fully. I lift my hand back, a small thank you in the space between floors. On the steps outside, the sun is brighter than the morning and people narrow their eyes against it. Margaret and her attorney stop in front of a microphone. She paints on sorrow fast and smooth. "My husband was vulnerable," she tells the lenses. "This process is painful, but we believe the truth will prevail." Claire stands 1 inch behind her, chin up, mouth set. A reporter asks, "Do you dispute the caregiver fees?" "Our counsel will address that," the lawyer says, stepping in. Mr. Pierce tugs at my sleeve. "Let's go down the side." We cut left, away from the cluster. Someone calls my name. I keep walking. Another voice, kinder, asks if I have a statement. I say, "Not today." The idea of making anything about this smaller than it is feels wrong. At the sidewalk, traffic moves the way it always does on Meeting Street. A trolley rings. 2 kids argue over a melted ice cream cone. The city keeps doing what it does, even with a courtroom full of people holding their breath. In the lobby again, cooler air, less glare. The clerk's window buzzes. Pierce hands over the exhibits, signs where they tell him, nods like this is just work. "You should go home," he says. "Rest." "I'm okay." "You should still go home." I don't argue. I don't have anything left to spend on that. At the base of the stairs, I pause. The ceiling fan hums. The flag near the entrance doesn't move at all. I think of my father in that room, the way he looked at me when I put fresh flowers in a glass by the bed, the way he used to clear his throat twice before he spoke. The weight behind my ribs eases just enough to let me stand a little taller. By the time I reach the doors, the hallway has thinned out. The last voices fade into the square outside. I push the bar and step into heat. A breeze lifts the edge of my dress and drops it. Behind me, through the glass, I hear the rustle of papers, the low buzz of people comparing what they thought they knew to what they just heard. Truth deserves proof. I walk down the steps without looking back. The apartment is quiet enough that I hear the rain tapping the window frame. I set my keys down, slide the old medical bag onto the table, and lift the envelope I found inside. The paper is thick, the seal pressed hard enough to leave a ridge. My hands won't stop shaking, so I steady them against the wood and breathe. For my daughter, Emily. His handwriting lists, letters leaning like they're tired and trying to stand anyway. I break the seal with my thumb. The sound is small and final. I sit. I unfold the page. "Emily, you were never a mistake," I read out loud, my voice thinner than I want. "You were the only one who stayed." My throat closes. I swallow and keep going. "I did more wrong than I can fix," the lines continue. "But you gave me time to try." I press the page flat with my palm. The lamp shows the dents of his pen strokes. I read the next part slow, careful, like the words might rip. "When they question your worth, don't fight. Show them by living better than they do." A sound gets out of me that isn't a sob and isn't a laugh. I wipe my face with the heel of my hand and keep reading because I can't stop. "You were my anchor when everything else drifted. I made you prove your love, and you never made me prove mine. I'm sorry." My shoulders shake. I put the page down and stare at the folded corner. I don't want to cry hard enough to blur the ink, but the tears fall anyway. Hot, heavy, honest. I pull in air through my nose. It stings. I reach for a tissue, miss, grab the edge of the table instead, and clutch until the wave passes. I pick the letter back up. "I left instructions to protect you when I'm not there to do it. The foundation, use it for people no one looks for. Use it for kids who sit at the back and wait to be told they're allowed to care." I blink until the words steady. "Find your true north, and don't let anyone twist your compass." I lay the letter on my chest for a long breath, then fold it along the crease and slide it back into the envelope. I set it beside the little silver necklace he once gave me when he was trying to be someone better. My hand rests there for a moment. Letter, necklace, a small stack of what we managed to hold on to. In the quiet, the rain lightens. I stand, wipe my eyes again, and turn off the lamp. The room stays gentle and dim. I put the letter into a clean sheet protector, then into a folder with his name on it. I don't label anything else. I don't need to. Morning comes pale and early. I dress in plain black and pin my hair back tighter than usual. At the door, I pause, pull the necklace from its box, and fasten it. The metal feels cool at my collarbone. I slip the letter into my bag and leave. The courthouse smells like paper and floor cleaner. Mr. Pierce meets me by the elevators with coffee I can't drink. He nods at the folder in my hand. "You ready?" he asks. "I can read it," I say. "You don't have to," he offers. "I know." We sit at counsel table while the room fills. No whispers today, just the careful shuffling of people taking their places. Margaret arrives in a black dress with sleeves too tight to be comfortable. Claire stands behind her with her hands clasped, jaw clenched. Neither of them look at me. The bailiff calls, "All rise." Judge Brooks steps in, robe neat, hair pinned, face set. We sit at her nod. "Counsel," she says. "Any preliminary matters?" Mr. Pierce stands. "Your Honor, we request the court admit a personal letter written by the decedent to Ms. Hayes, found last night in Mr. Hayes's medical bag." He holds up the folder, not high, just enough. Opposing counsel rises. "We object as to relevance and possible undue prejudice." "It speaks to intent and relationship," Mr. Pierce replies. "Handwriting and date are consistent with other admitted materials." Judge Brooks looks between us, then at the gallery. "Bring it forward." My fingers steady as I pass the letter up. The clerk walks it to the bench. The judge reads it in silence, mouth flattening once, eyes pausing in the middle as if she heard something behind the words. She lifts her gaze to me. "Ms. Hayes," she says, "are you prepared to read it into the record?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Proceed."
I stand. The paper sounds different in this room. I hold it so it won't shake. "Emily, you were never a mistake," I read, my voice low but steady. "You were the only one who stayed." The reporters stop typing. No camera clicks. Sweat gathers between my shoulders and the fabric of my dress. I take a breath and continue. "I did more wrong than I can fix. But you gave me time to try." At the plaintiff's table, Claire stares down at the wood grain. Margaret keeps her face forward, lashes still, mouth pressed flat. "When they question your worth, don't fight. Show them by living better than they do." I hear Mr. Pierce exhale. I don't look at him. "You were my anchor when everything else drifted. I made you prove your love, and you never made me prove mine. I'm sorry." The words "I'm sorry" land, and a quiet moves across the benches like the air itself took a seat. I swallow. "I left instructions to protect you when I'm not there to do it. The foundation. Use it for people no one looks for. Use it for kids who sit at the back and wait to be told they're allowed to care." I steady my hand and finish. "Find your true north, and don't let anyone twist your compass." I lower the paper. The room holds still. The judge nods once toward the clerk. The letter disappears into evidence with a soft slide of plastic against paper. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes," Judge Brooks says. Her voice has rough edges now. "The letter is admitted." I sit. My knees touch, then separate. My hands find each other in my lap, fingers weaving and unwinding. I focus on the cool circle of the necklace against my skin and let my breathing slow. The judge looks over at Margaret. "Counsel, any response?" Margaret's attorney stands but doesn't step forward. "Only to renew our objection, Your Honor." "Noted," the judge says. "Overruled." Margaret leans toward her lawyer and whispers. The microphone picks up nothing. When she sits back, her shoulders slump half an inch. Claire wipes under one eye with a fingertip and stares at the market leaves. Mr. Pierce rises. "No further evidence from the defense at this time." The judge nods. "Then we'll recess before closing arguments." She glances at the clock and then at me. "Ms. Hayes, you may step outside if you need a moment." "I'm okay," I say, because for the first time in weeks, I mean it. We stand with the room. The judge leaves. The murmur starts and grows. The bailiff says, "Keep your seats," and the sound drops. Margaret turns in her chair and meets my eyes for a heartbeat. There's anger there, and something behind it I can't name. She looks away first. Claire doesn't turn. The hallway feels colder than the courtroom. Mr. Pierce gives me space and walks a step ahead, letting me choose if I want to talk. I don't.
I walk to a window cut high into the wall and let the light warm my cheeks. When I blink, I feel salt on my lashes and swipe it away. A reporter approaches, cautious. "Miss Hayes, do you have a comment?" I shake my head. "Not today." He nods, backs away, and writes down the answer anyway. When we return, the gallery settles quickly. Judge Brooks takes her seat and folds her hands. "Closing statements will be heard this afternoon," she says. "Before we adjourn for lunch, I want to address the gallery. This court is not a stage for cruelty. It is a place for facts and for the truth that facts point to. I expect decorum." Her eyes pass over me, not lingering, just including. She lifts the docket sheet. "We reconvene at 2. The gavel taps, benches creak, voices rise and fall. As I stand, Mr. Pierce touches my sleeve. "You read it well." "It read itself," I say. He gives me a small smile. Gets a mare. Outside the courthouse doors, the late morning is bright and kind. A waiter from the cafe across the street hoses down the sidewalk. Pigeons scatter and settle again. A pair of tourists argue about directions with matching maps. The world is ordinary, and it feels like mercy. I walk to the corner and back, then stop by the granite wall and rest my hand on the cool stone. A text comes in. "Lena, proud of you." I type back, "Thank you." Then I put the phone away and look at the sky until my breath evens out. Back inside, the afternoon proceeds like it belongs to someone else. Lawyers talk, papers flip. The record takes everything in exact words. I sit, listen, and keep still. When it's over for the day, Judge Brooks lifts her glasses to the bench and speaks plainly. "The court will render its verdict tomorrow at 9 a.m. The sentence lands in my chest and stays. Not heavy, not light, just there. "All rise," the bailiff calls. We do. As people file out, I gather the letter, now encased and stamped, and place it carefully in my bag. I touch the envelope through the plastic once, a quiet thanks without words. Mr. Pierce steps to my side. "We're close," he says. I nod. "I'll be here." We reach the doors together. Outside, the light has shifted warm, the kind of afternoon that makes the harbor smell like salt and summer. I slip the necklace back under my collar and close my hand around. My breath lifted and stayed there. I ran my thumb along the flap. The paper gave way with a soft tear. Inside, a single sheet waited, folded in thirds. I unfolded it across my knees. His handwriting filled the page, letters leaning forward, ink a little faded. I smoothed the creases with my palm and brought the page closer. "Emily, you were never a mistake. You were the only one who stayed." My voice shook. I cleared my throat and tried again, quieter this time, just above a whisper. "I made you carry what wasn't yours. You gave me grace I didn't earn." Air left my chest in a slow exhale. I steadied the page with both hands. "When they question your worth, don't fight. Show them through how you live." I pressed my knuckles to my mouth for a second and kept going. "I wasn't brave enough to stand up for you in front of them, but I saw you every time. You were my compass, even when I pretended not to need one." The rain softened against the glass. My shoulders dropped. I read the last line so quietly I could barely hear it myself. "Find your true north, and don't let anyone twist it." The lamp buzzed. The clock kept going. I folded the letter carefully, then unfolded it again and read the first line once more. My chest tightened, then loosened. I lay back and set the letter flat over my heart. Warmth spread into the paper. Tears slid into my hairline and onto the cushion. I didn't push them away. They weren't heavy tonight. When they stopped, I sat up and reached for the top dresser drawer. The old silver compass lay in a small dish beside a rubber band and a stray earring. I lifted it by the ring. The case clicked open and the needle quivered before finding north. The face had scratches. The glass still caught the lamplight. I set the compass beside the letter on the coffee table. The two things sat there together like they'd been waiting to meet. I touched the edge of each one with my fingertips. "We're okay," I said into the room. I clicked off the lamp. The apartment held its own quiet. Outside, the rain thinned to a mist. Headlights slid across the blinds and disappeared. Morning came clean. The sky over Charleston wore a thin layer of cloud that let the light through. I held the letter inside a clear sleeve, tucked it into a folder, and left the apartment with it under my arm.
Mr. Pierce stood. Your Honor, the defense requests to submit a personal letter written by Mr. Robert Hayes shortly before his passing. Opposing counsel rose. Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant and prejudicial. The document is an emotional appeal, not evidence. Judge Brooks glanced over her glasses. Overruled. The letter will be heard and entered. A few pens stopped moving. A camera in the back clicked once. I stood, legs steady, and slid the letter from its sleeve. The paper rested against my fingers like a lightweight. I looked at the words, not the room. Emily, you were never a mistake, I read, my voice clear but small in the big space. You were the only one who stayed. Breathing in the gallery slowed. I moved to the next lines. I made you carry what wasn't yours. You gave me grace I didn't earn. My throat tightened. I swallowed and kept going. When they question your worth, don't fight. Show them through how you live. I paused long enough for the words to land, then read the next part. I wasn't brave enough to stand up for you in front of them, but I saw you every time. You were my compass, even when I pretended not to need one. A soft sound came from the third row. A small sob caught and covered. I finished the letter. Find your true north and don't let anyone twist it. I folded the page along the original crease and placed it back in the sleeve. When I looked up, the room had shifted. Reporters held their pens in the air, waiting. A woman in the back wiped under her eye. Claire stared at her hands. Margaret blinked and kept blinking, chin raised, mouth pressed into a thin line. I sat down. Mr. Pierce didn't speak. He rested his hand lightly on my elbow and let it sit there for a beat. I nodded to say I was fine and kept my hands folded. The letter lay on the table between us. Judge Brooks leaned forward, elbows on the bench, fingers interlaced. Thank you, Ms. Hayes, she said, her voice even. The court acknowledges this submission as part of the record. No one moved. The silence was firm and complete, like it had been built there. The judge let it stand, then she straightened. We will recess until tomorrow morning, she said. The verdict will be read at 9. Her gavel stayed still. She didn't need it. People rose slowly, as if a loud scrape might break something important. The bailiff called the recess out of habit. Shoes shuffled, papers slid into folders, microphones moved on their stands. I placed the letter back into the clear sleeve and closed the folder. Margaret's lawyer whispered to her. She nodded without looking at him. Claire wiped the corner of one eye with a fingertip and checked her hands for mascara. Mr. Pierce packed his briefcase. I stood and felt the floor under my feet, solid and plain. We walked out past the rows of benches. Eyes followed, but didn't press. In the hallway, the usual buzz ran soft. Someone pushed open the heavy doors at the end, and the light from outside filled the corridor. On the steps, the air smelled like wet stone and salt from the harbor. Reporters clustered near the rail, but kept their voices low. One called my name, then stopped and lowered his microphone when I didn't slow down. Mr. Pierce asked if I needed anything. I shook my head. See you in the morning, he said. I'll be early. Me too, I said. He touched the brim of an old habit of a gesture, almost a salute, and stepped away to answer a call. I stayed where the steps widened into the plaza. The folder pressed against my ribs. I could feel the outline of the letter through the cardboard. The necklace at my throat, thin chain, small silver charm, caught the light and flashed once, then settled. Traffic moved along Meeting Street. A delivery truck backed up with a warning beep. A gull glided low over the water and rose again. I took a breath that went all the way down and let it out. A woman I didn't know passed by with a tote bag. She looked at me, then at the courthouse doors, then back. That was brave, she said, not stopping. It was his, I said. She gave a small nod and kept walking. I moved down the last steps to the sidewalk. The stones were damp, but my shoes held. The wind off the water lifted my hair and cooled the line of sweat at my neck. The sky lightened by a shade, then another. People began to talk again behind me, the volume rising, the questions returning, the business of the day filling the space the letter had held for a while. At the curb, I paused and looked across to the park where the live oaks arched over the path.
A couple crossed with coffees in hand. A child jumped to hit a low branch and missed, then laughed at himself and tried again. A bus chuffed to a stop and opened its doors. I slid the folder deeper under my arm and pressed my palm against it once. My shoulders set into a steady line. I turned toward the crosswalk and waited for the light. The pole hummed and the white figure blinked on. I stepped forward. No one called after me. No one blocked my way. The letter rested against my side like a smooth, warm stone. My steps matched the click of the crosswalk signal. On the far curb, I stopped and looked back at the courthouse, only long enough to see the reflection of the sky and its high windows. Then I faced the street again and kept walking, head level, breath easy. I didn't measure the distance to the corner or count the blocks home. The day moved with me. I walked toward it. I sit straight-backed at our table, hands folded, shoulders loose. The courtroom opens slower today. No cameras in faces, no elbows at my ribs. Church bells drift through the windows and settle above the soft buzz of the lights. Mr. Pierce leans close without touching me.
"This is her last word before the verdict," he whispers. I nod once. The bailiff calls the room to order. We rise as Judge Brooks steps onto the bench. Her robe moves in a clean line. One nod. "Please be seated." Chairs slide, papers settle. The gavel doesn't bang, it taps like a reminder. "Before we conclude," the judge says, scanning the gallery, "the court will hear closing statements, and I will make a brief reflection afterward." A small tightening runs through the room. People shift. Margaret's bracelet taps once against her glass. Claire smooths the skirt of her dress and stares at the seal on the wall like it will blink. Margaret's attorney stands. "Your Honor, my client maintains that emotional influence compromised the decedent's will." That is our position. He sits, quick and careful, as if speed can hide repetition. "You may speak briefly, Mrs. Hayes," Judge Brooks says. Margaret rises in one graceful move. "I only ever wanted to protect Robert's legacy," she says, voice level, edges rounded for the microphones. This situation dishonors his name. It's been twisted by pity." She breathes, and in that beat she looks at me, warm eyes, cold math. "He loved his family. All of us. I won't let that love be rewritten." No one answers. I flatten my palms on the table. My thumb presses into the heel of my hand. I keep breathing. Judge Brooks lifts a hand. "Mrs. Hayes, you've had your say. Now you'll have to listen." Margaret sits. Her attorney shifts a page he doesn't need. The judge's voice steadies the space. "When I took this bench," she says, "I promised to separate law from sentiment. But sometimes law alone isn't enough to understand what people do to each other." A cough echoes from the back. Someone clears a throat and stops halfway. Sunlight inches along the floor, slow as the minute hand. The judge looks first at Margaret and Claire. "I've watched families tear each other apart over estates. Money, control, reputation." She lets the list hang. "They call it justice, but it's usually shame wearing good jewelry." A few heads dip. The line doesn't get a smile. It lands like a fact. She turns to me. "And sometimes the person who doesn't shout, who doesn't have the pedigree or the press, carries more truth in silence than others do in years of speeches." Claire's eyes drop to the polished wood. Margaret blinks too fast, jaw set. The water in her glass ripples when she puts it down. "You carried dignity where others carried entitlement," the judge says to me. "You didn't need this court to prove who you are, but this court needed to hear who you were." I don't move. My shoulders loosen a notch. A reporter's pen stops scratching. Margaret leans forward, trying to catch the thread. "You're judging feelings, not law, Your Honor." "No, Mrs. Hayes," Judge Brooks replies. "I'm describing behavior." "Mom, stop," Claire whispers, barely sound. It reaches our table anyway. Margaret doesn't turn her head. "You talk about legacy," the judge continues. "A man's legacy isn't in the zeros on his account. It's in who held his hand when he couldn't lift it. It's in who stayed." A quiet gasp moves through the gallery. Not dramatic, just human. Someone in the second row wipes under her eye with a knuckle. "Mr. Hayes wasn't a perfect man," the judge says. "None of us are."
but his final act shows clarity, not confusion. He gave power to care, not control. The clock ticks. I feel the rhythm on my skin more than I hear it. The room sits inside the pause and doesn't try to climb out. I've seen too many families mistake possession for love, the judge says, voice low, steady. But this case is a reminder that truth has its own pulse. It doesn't rush. It just waits for silence. She folds her hands together. Tomorrow, we'll give that truth its legal voice. No one breathes for a heartbeat. The silence isn't fear, it's weight. She closes her folder. Justice isn't always loud, she adds, almost to herself. Sometimes it's the quiet that finally gets heard. The bailiff shifts his stance. A hinge squeaks somewhere far back. Mr. Pierce leans toward me and doesn't quite smile. It's almost over, he murmurs. I know, I answer, barely above air. Across the aisle, Margaret lifts a tissue and presses it to the corner of her eye. The movement is precise, as if she's measuring the camera that isn't here. Claire keeps her gaze on the center seal, lip caught between her teeth until the color fades. Judge Brooks scans the tables. No one rises. No one argues. She nods once. Closing statements will be submitted on the record, she says. No further argument today. Margaret's attorney stands as if to object, then sits when the judge's eyes find his. The gavel comes down, one firm strike. It echoes, round and low. Court adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. People don't move at first. Then benches creak, and the soft, polite chaos of standing fills the room. A donor I recognize from a gala years ago avoids looking at me. A church friend from my childhood gives a tiny nod like a prayer he's not sure he can say out loud. Mr. Pierce gathers our papers as if they were something fragile. I'll file for the record in 20 minutes, he says. Get some air.
I close the top folder and slide it into the stack. My hands don't shake. I push my chair in, make space for the next hour of someone else's life. Margaret stays seated, hands flat on her bag, fingers tight on the leather. Claire doesn't touch her. They sit shoulder to shoulder, an inch farther apart than this morning. Their lawyer talks without sound. His mouth moves, his pen doesn't. They don't answer. I stand and turn toward the aisle. The sunlight has climbed since we came in. It cuts a clean line across the floor between our table and theirs. I step into it because it's there, not because it means anything. My shoes click once. The sound bounces up into the curve of the ceiling and disappears. At the door, I stop. I look back over my shoulder, not to hold the moment, not to mark it for memory, just to acknowledge the end of this part. Margaret turns her head at the same second. Our eyes don't meet. Claire keeps hers down. Mr. Pierce touches 2 fingers to his folder in a small salute. I'll call you, he says. I'll be at home, I answer. A man in the 3rd row steps aside to let me pass. He whispers, God bless you, and looks embarrassed that he said it. I nod once. It's enough. The hallway is cooler than the courtroom. The far-off sound of church bells picks up again, or maybe a car alarm masks it, then stops. The windows throw long bars of light across the tile, and the soft scuff of shoes makes a mild music out of nothing. Behind me, the double doors ease shut. Through the glass, I see the judge still on the bench, finishing a note with a straight, careful hand. She looks up just before the doors meet. Her mouth moves, not for the room, not for the record, just for the air between us. Dignity always finds its way home, she says, soft enough that only the bailiff hears it. He nods to no one. I press my palm flat against the cool metal push bar and step into the corridor. The day outside the windows is pale gold, not hot, not cold. My reflection follows me in the glass. Plain navy dress, hair pulled back, a thin chain at my throat. The small cross at the judge's neck glinted when she spoke. Mine catches the light now, softer, quieter. A court clerk hustles past with a stack of files nearly as tall as his chest. He drops one, stumbles, laughs at himself. I bend, pick it up, hand it back. Thanks, he says, flushed. Long day.
Tomorrow will be longer, I say, and we both smile a little, like people who know how time works. I reach the stairwell and start down. Each step has a particular squeak in the middle. It's a courthouse thing, unavoidable. On the landing, a poster for a food drive curls at the corner. Someone has tacked it down with a paperclip. Small order in a building full of big disorder. It steadies more than the marble does. At the lobby, the security guard from our first hearing raises 2 fingers in greeting. "Ms. Hayes," he says. "See you in the morning," I answer. "Yes, ma'am."
The revolving door turns once, twice, and the city meets me without fanfare. Cars slide by. A woman pushes a stroller with a paper bag balanced in the basket, careful not to crush it. A man laughs into a phone, then listens hard. The church across the street lets out a group after a midweek service. They talk in the soft, practical voices people use when their hearts are tired. Behind me, the courthouse keeps its own breath. Somewhere up there, a judge sets down a pen. Somewhere, a daughter and a wife collect their things and decide whether to speak in the elevator. I cross the plaza and stop where the stone warms in the sun. I don't close my eyes. I don't raise my face to the light. I stand and let the air move past me, steady and simple. The chain at my throat is warm. My hands are empty. Tomorrow is on the calendar. Today is finished. The door behind me swings once, then stills. That's all. The first voice I hear isn't the judge. It's the bailiff, calling us to rise. And then the scrape of chairs. And then the hush that sinks a whole room. I keep my hands flat on the table and breathe through my nose. Mr. Pierce slides a small note toward me. I don't open it. I fold it once and tuck it into my pocket. The paper makes a crisp sound that somehow steadies me. Across the aisle, Margaret and Claire sit with their attorney. Margaret's lipstick looks fresh. Her hands don't. I watch the tiny shake in her fingers as she adjusts a bracelet that doesn't need adjusting. Claire keeps her chin high and her eyes on the bench. A camera clicks from the back, then another, but softer than before, as if even the press has learned to whisper. "All rise," the bailiff says. We stand. Judge Brooks takes the bench with the same level gaze she has worn all week. Her robe settles. It doesn't billow, it lands. "Be seated," she says, and the room sits as one body. This court is now in session for the final ruling in Hayes versus Hayes Foundation. The air feels scrubbed. Same room, same wood, but cleaner somehow. Sunlight finds the brass nameplates, the edges of legal pads, the rim of a water glass. I feel the weight of the compass pendant against my collarbone and let it rest there. Judge Brooks turns a page. "This has been an emotionally charged case," she says. "The evidence presented was thorough, and the testimony, raw." She doesn't soften the word. She doesn't need to. Margaret's attorney nods as if agreeing is a strategy. The judge glances at him, then back to her folder. "This court was not asked to define love, but to interpret intent." She pauses. "Sometimes those 2 things are the same." A small stir moves through the gallery. It rolls and dies. She lifts her eyes. "Ms. Hayes, please stand." I rise. My chair doesn't squeal. Mr. Pierce doesn't touch me, but I feel him settle next to me, the way a boat settles when the tide changes. I fold my hands in front of me and keep my shoulders level. "After careful review of the testimony, evidence, and handwriting reports," the judge says, "this court finds no basis for the claim of undue influence." There's a beat where sound doesn't exist. Then breath returns to the room in one long sweep. The will of Robert Hayes stands. Case dismissed. A pen drops somewhere. Cameras crackle back to life. Reporters whisper names, dates, numbers. A chair leg bumps marble. Mr. Pierce exhales like he's been holding that breath for a month. "It's done," he says. Not for drama, just for the truth of it. Across from me, Margaret doesn't move at first. Her mouth opens and closes in total silence. Then she jerks to her feet so fast her chair skids and screeches. Heads turn. She doesn't care. "He chose her," she says, not looking at me. "He actually chose her." Claire's hand flashes out and grabs her mother's wrist. "Mom," she whispers, "let's go." Margaret doesn't sit.
She stares at the judge like the words might crumble under a stare. The attorney leans toward her and speaks into the space between them. Whatever he says, it makes her blink. He touches her elbow. She lets him. They step away from the table, one foot, then the other, like the floor just turned foreign. I don't speak. I watch them pass through 2 rows of people who used to send holiday cards and clap at fundraisers. The rows part without smiles, without pity. Relief has a look, and it is here. Microphones and phones lean in my direction like flowers toward light. Questions land one on top of another. Ms. Hayes, how does it feel to win? Did you expect this outcome? Will you take control of the foundation immediately? I lift my chin a degree. It's not winning, I say, my voice level. It's closure. The microphones lean closer, waiting for more. I don't give them more. There's nothing else that would help anyone breathe. Order, Judge Brooks says once, with a single rap of the gavel. Court is adjourned. Chairs move, people stand. The noise folds and unfolds. I sit a moment longer and line up my papers in a neat stack. My fingers don't rush. Mr. Pierce puts his hand on my shoulder, just a brief wait, and leaves it there long enough for the message to land. He'd be proud, he says. He already was, I answer. My voice wants to shake. It doesn't. We step into the aisle. Conversations pull back as if giving us space is a natural instinct again. I can hear one reporter behind me, the same voice from months ago at the funeral, say to someone, "She never raised her voice once." A second voice answers, "Didn't need to." Near the exit, Claire waits with her back to the wall. Her mascara shadows the edges of her eyes. For the first time in this building, she looks like someone's daughter, not someone's heir. "Emily," she says, barely more than breath. I stop. The door's metal bar presses cool against my palm. I turn just enough to see her, not enough to invite a scene. Silence does most of the work. She opens her mouth, closes it. The words don't live in her throat today. She nods instead, small, uneven, real. Half apology, half surrender. I return one small nod. It's not permission and it's not forgiveness. It's a line drawn in pencil that doesn't need to be darker.
Outside, the light is soft and wide. The courthouse steps hold the last damp from the morning. Reporters keep their distance, not by rule, but by something else. Mr. Pierce walks beside me and says nothing because nothing is needed. The air smells like wet pavement and magnolia. A breeze lifts the edge of my hair. I stop halfway down, and the city offers a single clear bell tone from the church farther up the street. The same bell that tolled the day of the funeral. It doesn't call or scold. It just marks time. "You did good," Mr. Pierce says, low enough that the microphones can't steal it. "We both did," I say, and that covers it. Halfway down the stairs, I press 2 fingers to the pendant at my throat, then slip my hand into my bag and find the small silver compass. The lid opens with a soft click. The needle shivers and settles. Sunlight kisses the glass and winks off. I run my thumb over the edge once. That's enough. I close it and slide it back into the bag. "What's next?" Mr. Pierce asks, not like a challenge, more like a promise that he'll still be here. "Something worth building," I say. He nods. "You've already started." We reach the last steps. The crowd's noise thins. A path opens without anyone telling it to. I hear a child's voice near the railing. "Who's that?" he asks his mother, pointing with the solemn curiosity only kids pull off. "Someone who told the truth," she answers. She doesn't mean it for me, but it lands anyway. At the bottom, a thin strip of water lays across the pavement. In it, I catch a quick reflection of me. The plain navy dress, the neat hair, the necklace. Not a victim, not a victor. Just a person whose lungs fill and empty like everyone else's. I walk through the water. It doesn't splash up, it just moves out of the way. The courthouse stands behind me, still tall, still stone, but smaller now in the way heavy things shrink when you set them down. Mr. Pierce stops to take a call. I keep walking. A camera flashes once and then lowers. I hear the rhythm of ordinary traffic, brakes, a bus hiss, the buzz of crosswalk signals. A woman on the sidewalk recognizes me and doesn't say anything.
She just gives a quick nod the way people nod to each other in hospital corridors when they've run out.
I consider him and nod once. What would you say to people watching this who are estranged from family? I look past him at the square of sky between Courthouse and Live Oaks. A cloud thins and the blue grows wider. I don't have advice, I say. Just this. Tell the truth, even if it's quiet. He lowers his mic and says, "Thank you." No follow-up. Also new. I turn and the crowd eases aside again. Steps, sidewalk, street. My phone buzzes in my bag, the same rhythm it has buzzed for weeks. I don't pull it out. The sound blends with the city and loses urgency. At the edge of the plaza, a woman in a floral blouse stops me with a careful hand lifted halfway. "Miss Hayes," she says, "my sister watched the hearing live stream. She said you looked like you could breathe in there." "I could," I tell her. She nods a few times, more to herself than to me, and moves on. I keep walking until the courthouse sits cleanly in my past. A gust lifts the hem of my dress. The pendant taps once against my skin. I press it flat and leave my hand there a second longer than necessary. The day is warm without being hot, the kind of day that makes you want to open windows. A city truck rolls past. Somewhere a dog barks and someone laughs. Life takes back the sound space that the case had been renting. Mr. Pierce catches up and falls in step. He doesn't ask where I'm going. He doesn't need to know. For half a block, we say nothing. Then he peels off toward the parking lot with a small wave. I raise my hand in return and turn toward the street that leads to the river. My steps find a steady rhythm. Heel, toe, heel, toe. The simple beat of being finished. My shoulders loosen. The knot where my jaw meets my neck lets go. I pass a store window and catch another quick look at myself. Neutral face, clear eyes, dry cheeks. I don't fix anything. I don't rehearse anything. At the crosswalk, the light switches to walk. I step off the curb and speak into the little wind that comes with moving forward. Not for anyone else, not for a recorder, just to set the words in the air where they belong. "It's over," I say, low enough that only the day hears me. And somehow, it's just beginning.